In the 19th century, the United States was rapidly expanding, and as settlers pushed in every direction, land was cleared of trees, water, people, and anything else that would have gone in the settlers' way. As new states and territories were created, settlers flocked to these lands, and Indiana was no different. In 1816, Indiana became the 19th state in the Union. However, unlike many other new states and territories, there were already a considerable number of settlers in Indiana. Still, much of northern Indiana remained unsettled due to the wetlands that took up a lot of the state, and the largest of these wetlands was the Grand Kankakee Marsh, a rich and luscious region that spanned an estimated 400,000 to 500,000 acres of land in northwest Indiana. One of the largest wetlands in North America, it was located in the Kankakee River watershed and was famed for its biodiversity, so much so that it was referred to as the Everglades of the North. However, due to the wetness of the region, it was terrible for agriculture and industry. Government surveyor Jeremiah Smith once described the region as rather uninviting to the capitalist and land speculator. But over the next 100 years, the power of frontiers, industry, and the desire for land would be demonstrated as the wetlands were cleared for farmland. The draining of the Grand Kankakee Marsh, which expanded the American frontier, allowed for the expansion and development of agriculture in the region. However, it negatively impacted biodiversity and has had long-lasting environmental impacts, showing the potentially destructive effect of frontiers on the environment. In the early 1800s, northern Indiana received few settlers because most people opted to go to the more promising frontier lands, namely the American West. Because of this, northern Indiana was sparsely populated by remaining indigenous peoples and the few that settled there. The area was largely ignored by the government and wasn't even split into counties, which can be seen on this map from 1819. This remained true for years, but interest in these lands was growing, and as America grew, so did Indiana, and there was demand for more land to settle. In 1830, the Indian Removal Act was passed by President Andrew Jackson, removing most of the indigenous population from Indiana, which cleared land for white settlers. By the 1830s, northern Indiana had become a new frontier. The first large-scale effort to drain the marsh happened in 1834 when the Indiana Mammoth Internal Improvement Act was passed by Governor Noah Noble to support Indiana's growing population. This act added $10 million to spending and funded several internal improvements in Indiana, including canals, roads, and the development of land in the Kankakee Marsh. The plan was to pay for the $10 million of additional spending partially by selling these newly drained lands. However, this plan completely failed and Indiana fell into financial panic in 1837, falling into over $13 million of debt by 1839.
The problem is that between corrupt politicians and contractors, the money was squandered and there was no actual work accomplished on their goal.
So, for the time being, the plan to drain the marsh was abandoned on a large scale, and in the next 20 years, little progress was made. However, in the 1840s, the idea of granting the states the public swampland within their borders so they could be developed became popular. This idea was suggested in an 1845 report by James Shields, the then commissioner of the General Land Office, that suggested this idea and said, "It will be the policy of the states, in some instances, even to give bounties to settlers to drain swamps and marshes and reclaim barren wastes." These ideas came to fruition in 1850 when the Swampland Act was passed. This act was aimed at Arkansas and other southeast states. However, other states like Michigan and Indiana were also granted their wetlands. By 1854, the federal government had ceded nearly 10 million acres of wetlands to the state of Indiana. With the land granted to the state, further efforts to drain and develop the marsh could begin. There was little resistance to this work as few people considered the environmental impact on the Grand Kankakee Marsh, and most people just saw the potential for development of the land. One 1883 report by John Campbell on the development of the Kankakee River and marsh states, "The drainage of these uplands for ages has been adding to the fertility of the marshes so that, not without reason, it is believed that these lands, when reclaimed, will be of the best quality." The general public supported the idea as well, not just government officials and surveyors. Most farmers in northern Indiana supported the destruction of the Kankakee Marsh, not only because it would create more land for agriculture, but also because many of them experienced regular flooding, and draining the marsh would fix this problem. One man who did oppose the destruction of the marsh was James Maurice Thompson, a former Confederate lieutenant who later became the state geologist of Indiana.
He, in the 1880s, wrote a piece that was published in a lot of newspapers warning of the potential disaster and what the damage that could be done and the few gains that could be realized.
Most Americans did not heed Thompson's warnings, however, and so work to drain the marsh began. There were several ways in which this was done, and ever-improving technology made it even easier. Drainage tiles that could easily drain subsurface water had been used in Indiana for hundreds of years and had existed for thousands, but as the use of steam power expanded, drainage tiles could be produced faster, and the ditches for these tiles could be dug more efficiently with machinery. By 1880, 1,140 factories located mainly in Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio manufactured drainage tiles that were used to drain wetlands for farming. By 1882, more than 30,000 miles of tile drains were operating in Indiana. Much of this work was done by the Kankakee Drainage Company, a for-profit established in the 1870s that worked to drain marshland in northwest Indiana. The company was employed by individuals, counties, and the state to drain whatever marshland they were hired to with no overarching plan.
They did accomplish a lot of what their goals were, but it was haphazard. And there was never any clear, comprehensive plan to accomplish what they were doing.
This drainage continued for nearly 50 years, but due to a lack of a singular plan for the drainage of the marsh, the results weren't what the company, the counties, or the state wanted to see. A U.S. Army Corps report from 1916 said, "The results attained have not been what might been obtained from the labor and money expended, owing to a general lack of cooperation among the parties interested and to the failure to adopt a comprehensive plan of improvement embracing the whole valley. The worms of improvement have for the most part been found by local interests in a haphazard manner." Despite this, it also said that the money expended had not been a total waste, and roughly 1/3 of the marsh had been reclaimed, while another third was partially reclaimed but prone to flooding, and the final third remained a wasteland. All of this was about to change, though, as in 1917 the Grand Kankakee Drainage Company got approval from the state government to dredge the entire Kankakee River, which means to excavate it of underwater material, deepening it and widening it, and allowing for more water to be drained into it. The dredges cut through northern Indiana, turning the meandering 250-mile river into a 90-mile straight ditch. These images show the extent of the work done. Here is the naturally flowing Illinois side of the river that wasn't dredged, while here is the artificially straight Indiana side that was dredged. With the deepening and the widening of the Kankakee, draining was made extremely efficient, and within just a year of dredging the river, the Grand Kankakee Marsh was gone.
It's amazing that an area that large, with the technology, even though it was progressing, was able to accomplish what they did in that short of time period.
Now, with the marsh gone and the land dried up, farmers settled in the newly drained land, but people quickly started coming to the realization that the quality of the soil was not nearly as good as it had been. It was the flooding that made the marsh so fertile, and ironically, by attempting to unlock this region's fertility for farming, they had destroyed it. There was some good quality farmland produced, however, the region will never be as rich, luscious, or fertile as when the Grand Kankakee Marsh occupied it. Since the destruction of the marsh, 120 wetland plant species and 60 wetland animal species in Indiana have been listed as threatened or endangered, and the draining of the marsh is partially responsible for this, because so much of these species' habitat was destroyed, showing the devastating impact the draining of the marsh had on Indiana wildlife. America's hunger for land destroyed not only the Grand Kankakee Marsh, but countless other habitats nationwide as well, showing how environmentally destructive expansion can be and the true power of the frontier.